We've had some technical difficulties.
What's going on? I'm coming back to Baldwin, but I was, look. No, I was over on the other side. Hey, old man. What's going on? What's happening? I was down there.
Attention to audience members, we're starting the meeting. Please take your seats.
Some lottery tickets. No, I went over
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
the other side.
Madam Chairman, Mr. Vice Chair,
I'm here.
Mr. Allen, Mr. Baker, Justine, Elliott, Ellis, Gavan, Grimsley,
Here.
Hall,
Ellis
Matt-
is here.
Here.
Marsh, Lawrence,
Grimsley here.
McCampbell, Orr, Rich, Schofield, Sells, Sessions, Shaver, Shed, Singleton,
Shed here.
Smitherman,
Shed here.
Wagner, Price,
Singleton here.
Wingo. Madam Chairman, you have a quorum.
Bryce here.
10-4, we have everybody on Zoom recorded as present. Thank you. All right, getting straight into our meeting, we have a presentation from Ed Austin, Chief Engineer of Alabama Department of Transportation. Mr. Austin, you have the floor.
Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, boy.
So we've got 4 things on your agenda. We are going to tag team this a little bit, if that's all right with you, Madam Chairwoman. Tony Harris is going to handle the STIP update. I will handle the fund allocation plan. Tony will come back up and address the interstate lighting issue, and then I will handle the I-10 update. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Harris at your agreement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Members, good afternoon. I'm going to give you an overview of where we are with the STIP. You should all have a set of bullet points in front of you. Attached to that document is the brochure about the statewide transportation improvement program. We've made efforts over the last few years to be sure that was on our website and available to you and to the public. It is a federally mandated 4-year funding and scheduling document for departments of transportation, and it is required to include road and bridge projects and transit projects. Every state must produce one every 4 years as a condition of receiving federal funds, and those funds cannot be spent without being, unless those projects are in the STIP. The STIP must be fiscally constrained, meaning projects cannot exceed the funding anticipated during that 4-year window. As I said, the current STIP covers the fiscal years 2020 through 2023. The process of preparing the STIP for 2024 through 2027 is getting underway now. And by the fall, we will have finalized all the dates for public involvement. I would encourage you to work with your local officials. If they have things they want to see, they need to work with the region folks and at ALDOT to be sure that those desires and interests are considered and in the process. And the entire STIP, as I said, is on the ALDOT website. The best way to find it, and this is how I find it, is to just type the word STIP in the search box up at the top right corner of the ALDOT homepage.
But if I could interrupt you, we have a hard copy here if anybody wants to peruse it before the meeting up here on the binder. So before you leave, if you have something you want to look up, it's right here.
So the brochure that's attached to the talking points, it's just a general overview of the STIP and the process. If you want to see what is in your area in the STIP, go to that online. It is searchable. You can query it by region, by county, and it will give you an idea of everything that is included in your district, your area, through the end of this STIP period next October of '23. Any questions about the STIP?
Question. Now, you said we can search it online, correct?
Yes, sir.
And, but this is, if we search it now, this will be from now until 2023, the projected.
That's correct. And those are projects that are programmed in. There's some slide in there from month to month based on our planning process, but typically that's a pretty accurate representation of what's going to happen when.
Okay.
Members, you have a bunch of stuff, a handout, so this is the handout that he's talking about.
And my contact information is on that sheet. If you ever have a question about that, you can call me or you can call your region engineer.
Any other questions of the members? Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda for ALDOT is the update of this year's fund allocation plan. You should have a copy, 4 pages of information in front of you. This is a updated version of the fund allocation plan that we have provided since, I think, 2019, 2020, whenever our first year was. So what you see in front of you is our program budget for this year. So federal funds shown with the new IIJA program. Legacy program, as I discussed at this meeting 3 months ago, those legacy program is those programs that have historically been in every transportation bill. That is $952,953,000. The new funding programs, and I've highlighted them in red so you could see those down below you, is right at $110 million. State public road and bridge funds are projected to provide about $530 million this year. Rebuild Alabama is now at 10 cents. ALDOT's portion of that is projected to be approximately $200 million. I put the asterisks next to the IIJA funds to point out what we discussed at the last meeting. We did not receive an appropriation for the IIJA funds until March of this year, and so those funds had not been provided to us until then, except for those handful of programs that were allocated funding through the general fund, not through the Highway Trust Fund. And so we received 2 or 3 of the 11 programs we received funding, but the majority of them we did not receive the funding for them until after March the appropriation occurred. And there's one program you'll see at the bottom. I've got an asterisk next to it for the PROTECT formula. That's the resiliency program. We still have not received our spending authority for this fiscal year from Federal Highway on that. They are still working on guidance on that program. And once we receive that, normally the obligation authority comes shortly thereafter.
For the benefit of everybody listening, what is the IIJA?
I'm sorry, that's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You may have seen it called the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That is the new 5-year Federal Transportation Act that we are currently under. So the IIJA was passed from an authorization standpoint as a 5-year bill, but in November of last year, but the appropriation did not occur for the Highway Trust Fund portion until March of this year, and they only provided appropriation for fiscal year 22. So we do not currently have an appropriation moving into the next fiscal year. What that will mean to us is still up in the air, but more than likely, we're being told that we're likely to begin next fiscal year under a continuing resolution like we did this year. It will be based on the current year of IIJA, not a previous program, but we will not get our full allocation if we start off under a continuing resolution.
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
have a question, Mr. Austin. Do you have any clue when the PROTECT formula program will be authorized for spending? No clue?
No, ma'am.
Or can you tell us like what projects would be funded?
Well, that's what we're waiting on right now is the guidance. So this is one of those new programs. I think we talked about this at the last meeting. There are 5 new programs: carbon reduction, PROTECT, the Bridge Formula Program, Electric Vehicle Formula, and ferry boats and terminals. The Protect Formula is a resiliency program. We have some general ideas or thoughts what might be, but until we receive that guidance from USDOT, I cannot tell you definitively what will be eligible. They issue guidance that tells us the types of projects or work that is eligible under that funding category, and then we have the responsibility of identifying projects that meet those requirements and then submitting them to Federal Highway for approval.
And is there a timeline for how long we will have to spend those funds?
That is hopefully going to be included in the guidelines, but because they have not provided it, our hope will be that they'll give us at least an additional year to spend that money, obviously, since they haven't provided it to us. But I can't tell you what they will do for certain.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Wingo, Representative Wingo.
Tell me, if you could, the carbon reduction program, give me some idea as far as what will that money be used for statewide?
Right. So what it can be used for are things like our intelligent transportation systems, our traffic management systems, auxiliary lanes. That's the only thing that's coming off the top of my mind, Representative. Those are the ones that we've identified this first year. It's got to be those types of projects that help reduce greenhouse gases. So capacity improvements are not eligible, but you can do some auxiliary lanes. But the big thing we're looking at, we've got several places around the state where we've got intelligent transportation systems, signs and other things that we can pay for, traffic monitoring systems where we've got traffic centers that maintain live information on traffic conditions and those types of things. And so we're identifying those initially as some of the things we'll look to do with that money.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions of the membership? I'm going to reverse the order because I want the two lighting proposals to be the same, right together. So would you give the I-10 update? I know we had some meetings in Mobile and Baldwin County today.
We did. So both MPOs this morning, the Eastern Shore and the Mobile MPO, unanimously voted to add the Mobile River Bridge and Bayway project back to their long-range transportation plans and transportation improvement plan. We will receive that information from both MPOs shortly. ALDOT will then request that be added to the statewide transportation improvement plan. And from there, we are ready to start moving forward with advancing this project. We will start having some industry forums next month to start talking to industry representatives about advancing this project, getting feedback from them on some things. We're looking to advance this as a design build process, probably a progressive design build. And so we will have industry discussions and then do a request for proposals, and request for qualifications will be released. So we start receiving official requests back from, or solicitations of interest back from eligible firms, and then we'll go through a process of shortlisting those and then going on from there to ultimately identify a team that will likely be who we move forward with.
Thank you. Any questions of the membership?
Yeah, I got one. Now, is this, and I'm just trying to get it for clarification purposes, is this in relations to the toll bridge or the toll?
Yes, sir, it is. So the project proposes to build
Well, one thing, I think there was a lot of concern about a toll bridge and that process from the citizens of the area.
Correct.
So I'm just trying now to make sure that the public is going to really know what this project is doing.
Yes, sir, I understand. Now, that's what the meetings today were. So both metropolitan planning organizations, the one on the Eastern Shore and the one in Mobile, have had multiple meetings over the last few months, provided public information and received comments, good and bad, on as it relates to the project. But ultimately, the locally elected officials in the Mobile and Baldwin County area voted this morning unanimously to put it back in both tips.
Okay.
And Representative they also did a $40 unlimited that you can buy an Algo Pass. So I think that addressed a lot of the locals' concerns, but thank you so much for asking. Representative Wingo, you want to be recognized?
General question, we can ask it later, or part of this. I wanted to just ask prior, and I didn't, was just about how's the state, AlDOT doing as far as cost of materials, delivery? You know, everybody's being impacted by materials, cost of, and lack of labor, on and on. How are we doing as far as with the taxpayers' dollars? How are we doing? And what are we doing to expedite? What are we doing to try to maintain schedules if we're struggling with, you know, with steel delivery, aggregate, you know, what are some things that we're doing that's forward thinking ahead of, you know, the design build is one.
Right, well, that's,
And that's great. Just wanted to ask you that big general question.
sure. You know, I think we covered this last meeting a few months ago. I wish I could tell you that things had improved, but as you've seen across the country, we're still dealing with supply chain issues. Inflation is impacting every business, including the construction business. Our prices are continuing to see an increase. Labor continues to be a problem for our construction industry and for AlDOT, especially in certain positions, our highway maintenance technicians and things like that. It's very difficult to find people at those entry-level positions that stick with you for a long period of time and really get to where they're of value to the department and the state. Some of the things we're doing, like you said, design build, we're looking at doing some design build projects. We've done some things where we are executing contracts early to provide contractors the opportunity to start stockpiling some materials early, go ahead and get materials in place now while they've got good bids for them, even if it's not necessarily something we would have done systematically in our process. We're kind of moving some things around to help in that regard. So we are trying to do some outside the box thinking and looking at some things differently to try to help save money, cut cost whenever we can.
Has it impacted projects greatly? Have we put a lot of projects on the shelf?
I don't know if put them on the shelf is the right word, but you know, Tony mentioned this as it relates to the STIP, so that has to be a fiscally constrained document. So the reason why I think Senator Elliott has talked about this, you see an amendment to that STIP just about every month is we have a letting every month. We let projects, we have estimates for as good as we can estimate, but inevitably those don't always come in exactly where we think they are. And the projects that are going to be let after that project, if we spend an extra $5 million on that project, well, now I'm $5 million out of balance. And you have to figure out how to adjust. And we've got a finite amount of money coming into the system. And so as the money goes out, what's left, that the projects for the rest of that year have to be physically constrained. So we may end up having to move a project from this year to next year or something along those lines, is how we're trying to address that.
Any other questions of the membership?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
this is,
you're recognized, Senator
Senator
Chambliss.
Chambliss.
You're recognized.
okay. Can you hear me okay? Yes. I have a guest here with me, and it looks like she's fading in and out on my screen. But anyway, my question was partially addressed with what Rich was saying, but help us understand, like, when those overages occur, and then at the end of the year, I would assume sometimes you have money left over. How does that get carried forward and then used on projects that, you know, future projects that go over? How does the end of the year leftover monies work?
Yeah, Senator, we never have money left over. I was hoping your question was going to be to introduce us to that wonderful young lady that was there with you for a moment. But so as I was saying, Senator, what we have to do is basically every month we have to look at what is planned We have a schedule meeting every month at our department where we take the projects that are scheduled, not just for the next month, but for the next 3 to 4 months, and we have to determine what we can advance and what we can't primarily because of financial constraints. Occasionally, some other things can play into it. But after every letting, as a result, we have to kind of recalculate where we are from a fiscally constrained standpoint, and if we need to adjust the STIP accordingly, that's what we have to do. Sometimes it has to do with the fact that a project has either been delayed for a right-of-way issue, an environmental issue, whatever, and we have to move that project out because we can't get it let before a certain time. And if they're doing paving, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to let a project in July, August, September when they're not going to be able to start before seasonal limitations issues hit them. So we may move that project to January or February. And when we move that out, then we may have the opportunity to move something else in that would not be constrained by weather issues or whatever. So it's a dynamic process that is, there's no set formula to it. We just kind of have to look at where we are from month to month and adjust accordingly and be flexible and ready to respond to the extent we can.
One quick
Okay,
follow.
thank you. That does make sense because we know we have more work than we actually have funds, but you use those month-to-month lettings to kind of manage that, push some forward, pull some back, that kind of thing to manage that throughout the year.
Correct, and keep in mind that we have budgeted categories for our funding. So, capacity improvement, if capacity improvement projects overrun, I can't move another capacity improvement project to later in that fiscal year because if I run out of that type of money, I don't have the flexibility to spend any kind of money in any way. I think we talked about this 1 or 2 meetings ago. The laws that are passed by Congress for the Transportation Acts set up an amount of money for each individual category in that bill. And we receive a finite amount of money in each of those categories. And so once we reach our limit for that year, if it's capacity or bridge replacement or safety, whatever it is, if there's another project of that category scheduled 2 months after we run out of money, we'll have to move that to the next fiscal year because we do not have any more money of that that's eligible in that category for us to use. So, I mean, that's just one of many examples of some of the things we have to juggle from month to month.
Okay, that's helpful. And I just did want to mention to the committee and to DOT as well that I'm going to be looking at some of that design build legislation and possible adjustments going forward. So if anybody has any input on that, would like to see us do it, not do it, that kind of thing, just kind of in a fact gathering stage now. So I just wanted to mention that to everybody.
Okay, thank you
Madam
so,
Chair.
thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll add on to that, at the roadshow of 2020, we introduced all the members to their MPO or in their technical coordinating committees. So I'm a member of our MPO, our TCC in Mobile, and that is a dynamic. The technical coordinating committee is generally the engineers with AlDOT and the city or the county and the interested parties. So they really are getting into the weeds of it and knowing which projects can be held back due to some snafus and others can be moved forward. So almost at every meeting, we're moving something forward or backwards,
That's right.
as elements and things coming up dictate. And Representative Wingo, you wanted the floor?
I wish somebody else would ask this question, but being a fan of a 2-pavement system, we were talking about pricing, increasing in materials and delivery and things. Have we done a comparison to see if pricing for concrete is equal to the pricing increase of, say, asphalt and vice versa?
Well, we're working on those projects, the alternative design, alternative bid projects, based on the requirements of the law. And those dictate we do both pavement systems under certain circumstances, and the low bid is what we move forward with. So that's what we're looking at as it relates to those projects, staying consistent with the requirements in the Act.
Madam Chair, this is not really a question,
Representative Shaver, you have the floor.
but it's an example of what we're talking about. It's a concern that I have. I don't think I would ask a question, but I don't think you can really give us an answer at this point, but a particular A-Trip 2 project in Etowah County in the city of Gadsden at Hood Avenue, and it's State Highway 431, 231, the worst intersection in the city of Gadsden, the most dangerous. There's a project there that was $811,000, and then the actual construction cost is now $1.5 million.
Yeah, it's about 1.4, 1.5 was the bid.
Yeah, 1.5, the bid came in, and the city's match went from $30,000 to over $700,000, which they don't have. And so it's caused them to ask for additional time and additional funding, so I don't know what's going to happen with the status of that project. I mean, do you know?
Well, they've got a couple of options, so I can't tell you that I know every reason that project went that much
Part of it was
higher.
concrete.
And it could have been. Honestly, I've not delved into that one to that depth. I feel certain that some of that is just the escalating cost that we're seeing across the board in general in the construction side. But that is an estimate that was submitted by the sponsor, wasn't done by AlDOT. So I'm a little at a disadvantage to be able to try to defend the estimate that was provided. And so, that's part of it is we are doing additional due diligence on AlDOT's side when it comes to our cost estimates, because it becomes so critical that you are at least in hailing distance of your estimate, because if you overrun significantly like that, a 50% overrun on a project in our world is a big deal. It's a big deal. It has the effect of several
Absolutely.
other projects that we're going to be let later may have to be moved. So we're working very hard to try to get our estimates as fine-tuned as we can, always have, but now more so than ever because of the changes that we're seeing on a month-to-month basis from a letting standpoint. Their options could be, because they didn't receive the full amount of A-Trip 2 consideration, they can request additional funding.
They have.
And we've passed
Yeah,
this
they
information on
have.
to the sponsor, but I'll share with you, they can request additional funding from the committee, and that committee has the discretion to choose to provide some portion, all, none. We've seen all three examples in the last 3 years of A-Trip where the committee has chose to provide 50%, 100%, or 0%. So it will be up to that discretion to determine.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item of lighting on the interstates. So Tony, you're up, and of course, Baker Allen, you're on deck.
Madam Chair, you asked us to bring some information about interstate lighting. I'm going to try to hit what I think you want us to cover. If I fall short or miss anything, I'm happy to hold questions over and get back to individual members. I'm happy to take questions after the meeting today, and I'm happy to report back at the next meeting if I miss something today. There are approximately 280 exits on the interstate system in Alabama, and we have about 1,000 miles of interstate highway. Lighting is installed at about 60% of those 280 exits. That's approximately 165. I think the actual number is 168 of those exits. In the past 11 years or so, we've seen about 10 new projects to install new lighting at exits across the state. These projects have provided exit lighting for the first time at those locations. These are typically associated with new development and growth in areas and are requested by the local governments in coordination with AlDOT, or initiated by local governments through their metropolitan planning organizations with those funds. AlDOT currently engages in a practice of splitting the cost of new exit lighting with local governments on a 50-50 basis, unless MPO funds are committed. And when that happens, if an MPO area wants to install lighting at a new lighting at an exit, they can commit their MPO money, federal money, with a 20% local match. And that's a good way to get to the outcome they want. A recent example of MPO-funded lighting is in the Auburn area at two locations, one at exit 57 and one at Beehive Road, which is the location where a new Buc-ee's is going in. So we do extend that 50/50 offer. In most MPO areas, the biggest issue we see is maintenance of existing lighting. Outside of MPO areas, cities and counties can use their local share of fuel taxes and other funds, and we will match them on that 50/50 basis. One note, I think someone mentioned ATRIP funds. ATRIP 2 funds have been used in Chambers County for a new exit lighting project on Interstate 85 at exit 79. And that project installed lighting at exit 79 and a short distance down the interstate to the new Welcome Center at the state line. And Senator Price, I think that project is in your district. So as I was mentioning about maintenance and upkeep of all the existing interstate lighting in municipalities, as well as all maintenance of new lighting projects, is the responsibility of local governments. In urban areas, particularly in the Birmingham area, maintenance has been an issue in recent years. We have written agreements where each municipality agrees to maintain and upkeep their interstate lighting after it's installed. The biggest issue with maintenance of interstate lighting, whether it's at an exit or on the main line, you're dealing in most cases with antiquated lighting systems. Theft and vandalism are huge issues, especially in the Birmingham area. And we see damage to light poles very common. In the West Central region, for instance, with damage, 2 separate incidents over the last few years, 2 light poles on Interstate 2059 and 1 on Interstate 22 were damaged before new light projects were even finished. And so that means we were out there installing, contractors were out there installing new lighting at exits. And before they even finished and got the lights up and functioning, we had insurance claims that we had to work through because of crashes with vehicles. New lighting projects, anything new, we're typically seeing LED lighting used. It's a better lighting than the old antiquated systems. And we're seeing aluminum conductors and wiring and components are buried rather than put in accessible conduit. That's helping us with our theft and vandalism issue, and it hardens those systems against tampering. A conversion of old lighting to LED is emerging. It's becoming more common. Even retrofitting some of the existing stuff. The City of Mobile has an ongoing project where they're converting in that area. And I think we'll see more of that as we move forward. Give you an example of some costs. Costs for the most recent interstate exit lighting projects range from about $2.2 million for Bent Creek Road, exit 57 in Auburn, to about $3.7 million for exit 79 on Interstate 85 in Chambers County. And those are projects that are just 20 or so miles apart. And the Chambers County project also included lighting between that exit and the new Welcome Center, so it was a little bit higher. So that's a broad brush of a complex issue. I'm happy to take any questions now, after the meeting or before the next meeting, and happy to report if I need to at the next meeting. Madam Chair?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we might have the presentation from Baker Allen, and then if we have any questions on that, we'll pull you back up.
Happy to come back.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Representative Brown.
Could I ask one question? What recourse do you have if a municipality fails to maintain the lighting that they have?
We've struggled with that issue, and I think it's something we're still working through. I'm not sure I really have the answer for that today. We'll work on that.
But Representative Brown, that's why I brought this to the attention, because I've had some smaller, let's just say Chickasaw. They've got a little exit out there, they're so high up, that's an issue, and then some of the technology. So that's what brought it to my attention. I thought that AlDOT was in charge of lighting, and then the more I investigated, the more I found out. So that's when we also asked the Association of Municipalities to come in and let us hear from the cities, and then we might need to work something out.
Yeah.
We might need to figure out how to make them.
We look to the local governments to be the first step in that process. And so that's part of the equation there.
Okay, Baker, come up here and tell us how the cities feel about it and what we can do to make it better.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. My name is Baker Allen. I'm the Director of Policy and Research for the League. We prepared this report for y'all. It's based on a survey we conducted of our members. You turn to page 1. Real quick, we had 245 responses, completed responses, and another 10 that were partial responses to our survey, representing a little over half of our municipalities. First question on there we asked is, what type of roadways go through your community? We specifically asked about highway, federal highway and state highways that go through an interstate. As you'll see, 46 had interstates that ran through their system, through their communities, and 224 had state or federal highways that ran through. The next chart on the bottom half of that page just asks, do you have lighting in those? So if you can compare those kind of top numbers to the bottom numbers, you'll see there's a gap, that there are communities that don't have lighting. At the far right, you'll notice 15 of those communities don't have any lighting at all, whether that's local, state, or interstate lighting. The next page, you'll see top page 2, same graph, but it's broken out by rural and urban areas. So we asked municipality, how do they identify as a rural or urban community? It's how we develop that standard. And you'll see kind of they both follow that same standard, except for in the no lighting, which remains predominantly rural issue. The next 3 questions you'll see are based, we put them in a pie chart form, and it just asks, is the lighting currently meeting the needs of your community? Broken down by local, state and federal, and then interstate systems. You'll notice that the local, only 8% said they do not meet that standard at the local level, but as you go up, that number increases. Page 4, you have 22% not meeting the standards for state, or not standards, but the needs for state and federal highway, and up to 35% for interstates. Go to page 4, this will be our last graph. We asked, are they planning on adding long-term, in their long-term planning, lighting in their community? Again, the vast majority are not planning that, but you notice that there's still a substantial number, including on adding lighting, interstates and federal highways as well, continuing to build out on local roads too. And the final question we asked is just in general feedback. You'll notice it's listed by municipality in alphabetical order. You want to identify the municipalities in your district and their feedback. Just a summary of the 2 things I noticed stuck out the most is there's a lot of interest in additional funding to support the build out of lighting in those communities. And second is a big shift to LED lighting. It's kind of mentioned earlier. There's a cost saving with electricity associated with that. So there's a lot of interest in that process. But part of the feedback we heard is that can be expensive to convert to LED. And that concludes my report.
All right, thank you. Does any of the membership have questions? All right, thank you so much, Baker.
Thank you.
Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Jane Covington, who's the Regional Vice President in State Governmental Affairs for CSX, and she represents the Alabama Rail Association. Is that correct?
That's correct. I served this year as the chair of the Alabama Railroad Association.
I've asked Ms. Covington to be here because this past session we had a lot of interest in railroads crossings, and there's also a potential labor strike that could interrupt our flow of goods and services, so I've asked her to update the committee on any items of interest. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Wilcox. Members, as the chairman indicated, my name is Jane Covington, and I work for CSX Transportation based in Nashville, but spend quite a bit of time here in Alabama as I cover the state as well. Chairman Wilcox and committee members, I do appreciate the opportunity to address you today. And I'd like to start by taking just a minute to let this committee know that the rail industry enjoys a very collaborative relationship here with ALDOT from an industry that crosses a lot of state lines. I just want to make sure that you know that that is not the standard and that we do very much appreciate that relationship. Chairman Wilcox did ask me to cover the two topics reflected on your agenda today, and the first of those is a new program also created under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and that is called, it's a grant program called the Railroad Crossing Elimination Grant Program. You should have a fact sheet included in your handouts that gives you some information on this program, but I'll touch on some highlights for you. The fundamental purpose of the program is to fund crossing improvement projects that enhance safety and mobility for both people and goods. It is further intended to reduce the overall number of at-grade crossings. Approximately 94% of rail-related injuries and deaths are the result of either crossing accidents or trespassing on railroad property. As this group knows, there is a historic level of funding available from the federal government right now. Total nationwide funding for this new program is $600 million per year for 5 years. So this is a 5-year program. The notice of funding, which literally just came out in about a week and a half ago, says that additional funding may become available during this 5-year period, and if so, I'm sure we'll be notified. As with many other programs, this is an 80-20 match, with, of course, 80% being the federal grant portion and then 20% local match. Importantly, this is a competitive program. It's not formula-based. And so, as such, applicants will need to be proactive with their planning and start now. There are 6 categories of eligible projects under this new program. The first is grade separations, so obviously that means bridges or underpasses. The second is track relocation, and that would be, you know, if the relocation of some railroad track could eliminate the need for an at-grade crossing. The third is improvement or installation of warning devices or signage to improve safety, as long as they are related to a grade separation or a track relocation. The fourth is other means of improving safety or mobility, such as technology. The fifth is a group of related projects to improve safety. So you could, you know, group several of these together to create sort of a corridor project, and that would qualify. And then finally, the planning, environmental review, and design for such projects would qualify for grant money. And under that funding, there are 2 categories of set-asides. The first is planning projects. So 3% of the total, or approximately $18 million, would be reserved for the planning phase of one of these projects. And under that, 25%, or $4.5 million, of the planning funds must go to projects in rural areas or tribal lands. And then the second category is rural areas or tribal lands. At least 20% of the total, which would be about $115 million, must be allocated to those areas. And under that, 5% of that amount, which would be about $5.7 million, must go to counties with 20 or fewer people per square mile. And then as it relates to award size under this program, the FRA, Federal Railroad Administration, will not grant less than $1 million per project unless it is for the planning portion of the project. So those could be less than $1 million. There's no maximum award amount, but no more than 20% of the total grant amount, which again is about $115 million, may go to any one state. Railroads have been sharing this information proactively since we found out about it with communities where we think, you know, that there might be a viable project. Railroads cannot apply. Only local or state governments or MPO-type organizations can be the applicant, and we could provide letters of support and help with applications, that type of thing on the back end of it. Again, this is a 5-year program, but the first grant deadline, and remember this was just announced within the last 2 weeks, the first grant deadline is October 4th. So really only, shovel-ready projects or projects that local governments might already have an idea about or plans for, they could apply for the planning phase or the preliminary engineering portion of the project, but it's a pretty tight deadline on the front end. So if you don't make it by October 4th, then, there's plenty more time to apply in the next round. And then the second topic that I've been asked to address is the current status of rail labor negotiations. Rail labor and the carriers negotiate contract terms under collective bargaining, which is a process that is set forth by the Railway Labor Act. And during the most recent round of negotiations, which come up about every 5 years, under that process, negotiations and mediation stalled, and the labor unions declined the proffer of arbitration. So after that, there was a 30-day cooling off period, and now a presidential emergency board has been appointed to help the two sides come together. The board was appointed on July 17th, and they convened this past Sunday, which was July 24th, and they have 30 days to conduct interviews or hearings and then issue a report with settlement recommendations. Once they issue those recommendations, there will then be another 30-day cooling off period. And during the board deliberations and that subsequent 30-day cooling off period, neither side is allowed to exercise any type of work stoppage or self-help. I will say that presidential emergency boards are somewhat rare, but they've happened, and they typically do result in in agreement. And so we're very hopeful that that will happen. Railroad employees, as everyone knows, were considered essential by the state of Alabama and the nation during the COVID shutdown, and they have worked tirelessly to keep commerce and our supply chain moving. And the carriers certainly believe that they do deserve an increase. It is, though, important to note that railroad jobs are already among the highest compensated industrial jobs. In 2020, Class 1 freight rail unionized employee compensation, including benefits, averaged about $130,000 per year. That said, the carriers have proposed salary increases that are consistent with the current labor market to keep rail workers among the highest paid in the nation. And to give you some additional context, the typical pay increase that workers are awarded during the collective bargaining process is between 11 and 17%. And as it stands going into the Presidential Emergency Board, the carriers had offered 17%. And I will also say that the Presidential Emergency Board is made up of very experienced railroad arbiters, and we do believe that they'll help bring the sides together, and we feel very confident that we'll come out of that process with agreement. If for some reason that does not happen, Congress does have the ability to act at that point to prevent any type of work stoppage. And I think it's safe to say that neither side, neither the employees or the carriers, want to get to the self-help point. So we are hopeful and feel very good about the prospect for the PEB to issue some recommendations that both sides could agree to. And that's it, Madam Chairman. I'm happy to take questions.
I'm going to ask the first question about the blocked, or about crossings, because I've noticed there was a new announcement about a way to report blocked crossings, and if that'll be come into play when they're deciding which ones to improve. And for those of y'all that don't have it, it's www.fra.dot.gov/blocked crossings. So I know that this past year, we've had a lot of communities that we've been hearing about in Montgomery, and I'd like to give you a mechanism to report it. And then would you tell us how that plays into
Sure.
the grant process?
Sure. That actually has been available for some time now, and I can't remember exactly how long, but probably close to probably a year. But that is a website that the Federal Railroad Administration, which is one of our federal regulators, that's a way that people can report block crossings to the federal government. And when they see that there are, a significant number for one particular crossing, then they reach out to that railroad to get information. As I hope many of you in this room will attest to, when block crossings are brought to the attention of a railroad, we do everything we can to resolve it. And in some cases, we are looking to this program and have approached communities to look for an infrastructure solution that would be, a permanent one to resolve some of those issues. But as the chairman just said, the notice of funding for this program was just issued in the last couple of weeks. And since then, the FRA has held some webinars to educate communities on the process. And they did say in the last webinar that they will check their own block crossing report records as they are evaluating awards for this grant program.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Wingo, you have a question?
I have a question. I need your help.
Okay.
So in the state of Alabama, in development, whenever a rail company is involved, you're looking at the timeline to be almost doubled or sometimes tripled because of just the inability to work with a rail company as far as whatever it may be. The city of Tuscaloosa, as example, this past Monday, we met mayor and the transit authority that we have there with the city. We've been trying to get Kansas City Southern to respond to our plans at Martin Luther King and Jack Warner Boulevard in Tuscaloosa. We have been shut down for 8 months because we could not and cannot get them to respond to us. They have final documents. We just need them to review, approve. We'll make the changes. We'll be glad to.
Mm-hmm.
That's just one example. We were delayed approximately 2 years on an overpass behind Mercedes, Highway 11. And so that's just with the city, but personally I've been involved with rail and development, and it's impacted the private industry development, which impacts the economic growth of cities and communities, as you well know, sales tax base, and cities depend upon that. And inevitably, it seems like, and I've always wanted to say this, and I'll never get a chance, I'll say it now, inevitably, it comes down to if there's a rail involved, it's going to shut your job down for a year, 2, or 3. I'll finish. I had an idea, and it involves the DOT. And I'm just the person with the voice, because every municipality that's ever done economic development or growth that has run and involved with a rail has dealt with the same thing or is dealing with it. But my idea was, in order to expedite this, because a lot of these companies, these rail companies, are out of state. They don't have a personal interest in this, but we do. This is our state. We represent the people, and it's stopping growth. And that's what we're focused on, is growth. And that's what's happening in Tuscaloosa. It's killing us. Here's my question, an idea for DOT, that possibly is that an opportunity for brainstorming to have a separate department that could support out-of-state rail companies to represent the cities, municipalities, private developers, people that are trying to create growth in this state, good in this state. Is there an opportunity possibly for the state, us, the state of Alabama, to look at so that we can expedite this? Because it's hurting us. We're losing state dollars. And so that was, I have a two-part, but I'm asking your help with Tuscaloosa, and I'm asking DOT to consider possibly supplementing these companies so that we can get to decision-making so that we can resolve these.
So if I may, a couple of things. So I'm assuming you're talking about utility permits, is that?
I'm talking about everything. We're looking at replacing the wood with the steel on the trellis that goes across the Warrior River. We're just looking at the underpass there to improve the abutments and the embankments, and just some basic things so we can keep going.
So as it relates to utility permitting, that for the Class 1 railroads is pretty much all online now, and it's about a 30-day turnaround time. I have been with CSX for 26 years now, and so I do remember a time when it took, 6 months or longer to get those permits turned around. But with technology, it's a fast turnaround time now. But for other things like what you may be, I'm not sure the specifics on that project because that's Kansas City Southern is not my company, but I will say that we do have the Alabama Railroad Association here. The executive director, Macy Walker, is joined by Zoom, and I think she'll be back from maternity leave starting next week. But if you have an issue with a particular railroad and you don't know how to reach them,
Well, we reach them, we don't get them to respond. You see, we've reached them. And
Okay, well, we'll
But
get the
sometimes
Alabama
going-
Railway Association, and Martin Christie is here. I saw him earlier, so he might can stand in for Macy in the meantime.
absolutely, and all of us, even if we work for another railroad, on the government affairs side, sometimes if we know about it, then we can help, figure out what the logjam might be. And sometimes, I will say many times, it turns out there's, miscommunication between the two, and going to the government affairs rep can be very helpful. So I will make sure that that my counterpart with Kansas City Southern is aware of this issue, and we'll get back to you. But that's my first recommendation: is make sure that you reach out through government affairs to the railroad.
And I appreciate that, thank you. But
Sure.
rail, and you can ask any mayor, any municipality, any city engineer, rail is your number one delay. That's just the way it is. And I wish it wasn't. So I'm trying to see if there's a way we could resolve that.
Well, I wish it wasn't too, because we, as you know, are important for economic development and jobs and that type of thing, but we need you guys as well. We need to be good partners with state and local governments, and I would very much just like to reinforce, please let us know when you're having an issue, and I think you'll find that you'll get help from us on the government affairs side. Sure.
Thank you, and that's really why we invited her here and to represent Railway and to give us an avenue of communication. Senator Elliott, you had asked for a question. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Covington said that it's not all bad, and we want you to come back next time we invite you back.
I'll come back anytime.
I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for your CSX's innovative use of Growing Alabama tax credit in North Baldwin County that supported certainly economic development ahead of time, a very proactive use of that, about $5.5 million to extend a CSX rail spur onto that property that had a huge impact on landing $2.5 billion in investment. So it's not all bad, and y'all are doing a very good job to support economic development in this state and are a huge driver of that. And I, for one, will continue to be very supportive of your efforts there, as well as to make sure that our freight railways stay freight railways and not so much passenger railways as it surrounds the Port of Mobile. So we thank
We
you for what
appreciate
you're
that
doing.
very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
And a final compliment, if you're on your way to Dauphin Island, you won't lose your trailer axle or your trailer or your boat axle, because CSX has done an extensive remodel of that Range Line Road crossing, so thank you again.
In partnership with ALDOT.
In partnership with
That's
ALDOT.
right.
I do not want to leave ALDOT. They've still got to come up and do some more repaving, but I've already heard some great reports on it, so thank you so much. And I've driven over it and taken pictures. I love it. Thank you. And thank you for committing to come back. We'll see you in October with some follow-up reporting as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chairman.
Yes?
Chairman, I have a question before she leaves. On the federal program that you were talking about, the separating on the grading for overpass, when you talk about the rural dollars, and I know you talked about a 20% match, are we still talking about 20% when it comes to the rural communities also, when you set aside that special amount of money?
From my read of the notice of funding, that 80-20 match applies across the board. It doesn't, a certain percent of the whole, amount of the program is designated for rural areas, but it doesn't change the 80-20 match.
That is going to hurt a lot of rural communities that just doesn't have tax bases to be able to do a 20% match. I know in one of my communities, the trains sit there for hours and hours and days on emergencies. Ambulance can't get into communities. Fire trucks can't get into communities. We've reported this over and over again when we probably need an overpass, but that community couldn't afford a 20% match for an overpass.
May I ask what community that is?
York community, York, Alabama, in Sumter County.
Okay. I will make sure that I'll look into which railroad that is and make sure that we have someone from the railroad reach out to you about that.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Any further questions of the committee members on Zoom or in person? Thank you so much for coming. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chairman.
Caleb Heineman with Legislate LSA, please come up and give us the road builder liability report that you've authored and have some insights to give us.
Members of the committee, I was asked, this committee asked our office to study Senate Bill 248 of the 2021 regular session dealing with road builder liability, and to survey the states and see how Alabama's law fit into the states nationwide. And we found there are two general prevailing rules. One is adopted by the majority of states. About 40 states have adopted this rule. It's the Restatement of Seconds Foreseeability Rule. That rule was explained by the Alabama Supreme Court as stating that following acceptance of the contractor's work by the contractor, if the structure was negligently built and it was reasonably foreseeable that these persons would be injured, the contractor can remain liable following the contractor's completion of the work. And the minority rule is the completed and accepted work doctrine. This basically says that when a contractor performs the work and the work is inspected and accepted by the awarding authority, the contractor's liability is ended unless one of the exceptions is met. And so in 2012, the legislature enacted Act 2012-225, and this essentially codified the completed and accepted work doctrine. And this law provided that when a contractor constructs or repairs a road or bridge, the contractor is justified in relying upon the specifications that are contained in the contract with an awarding authority. A contractor acting on behalf of an awarding authority may not be held civilly liable for work performed on a highway, street, or bridge unless physical injury, property damage, or death is caused by one of the three exceptions in the legislation. Those three exceptions are first, a failure by the contractor to follow the plans and specifications resulting in a dangerous condition. Two, the contractor's performance of the contract in compliance with the plans and specifications, but even though they complied, it created a dangerous condition that should have appeared to a reasonably prudent contractor to be a dangerous condition. Or three, a contractor's negligence created a latent or hidden defect creating a dangerous condition that ended up resulting in injury. With regard to the second exception, the contractor performing the work in accordance to plan without negligence, but because the design of the contract was perhaps negligently designed, the law requires the contractor to notify the chief engineer of the Department of Transportation by certified mail that there a potential dangerous condition exists. And by doing that, the contractor is protected from liability. And then Alabama also has a statute of limitations and a statute of repose that require that where any cause of action against a contractor who builds a road or bridge must accrue within 7 years from substantial completion of the construction, and the cause of action must be commenced within 2 years of the accrual of the action. In 2021, Senate Bill 248 was proposed, and it sought to delete this second exception. If enacted, a contractor would no longer be held liable if the contractor performed work in accordance with the contract specifications, and it also removed their failure to warn the awarding authority to be absolved of liability. We did an analysis of other states, and as I said before, about 40 states have adopted the majority rule, the foreseeability rule, which requires negligence on behalf of the contractor to be liable. 10 states, including Alabama by statute, with regard to road builder liability, follow the completed and accepted work doctrine. Every other state we looked at did not have the exception that was sought to be removed by Senate Bill 248. In other words, if Senate Bill 248 was passed, it would put Alabama in line with the other 9 or 10 states that have adopted this minority view. For example, in Florida statute, section 337-195 says that the limitation of liability being the completed and accepted work doctrine does not apply when the proximate cause of the personal injury, property damage, or death is a latent condition, defect, error, or omission. And Alabama does have latent, not created by the contractor, created by the contractor and not a defect, error, or omission in the contract documents, or when the proximate cause of the personal injury, damage, or death was the contractor's failure to perform to the contractor's standards. I think some of these other states are explained in the memorandum we sent out. I'm going to read it. But in Georgia, this specific issue addressed in Senate Bill 248 was before the court in David Allen Company versus Benton. So the issue was whether to allow a contractor to be liable when the contractor was not negligent, followed all of the designs and specifications of the contract, but a dangerous condition resulted from the designs and specifications themselves. And the Georgia Supreme Court specifically rejected allowing liability in this instance and said that unless the contractor specifically held itself out as being an expert in the design of the work, it would not be liable for just following the designs and conditions themselves. And in California, they also follow the completed and accepted work doctrine. And there, in one of the cases cited, the contractor followed the designs. There were, in specifications, years later, there was a car accident alleged to be as a result of the design of the road, and the court held in favor of the contractor, saying that this defect was observable on inspection. The contractor did not have a duty to. It was not the contractor's fault as long as he followed the designs and specifications. And so, in summary, about 40 states follow the majority foreseeability rule, where if the contractor's negligence and that foreseeability, that it's foreseeable that the negligence of that contractor could cause damage later on the road, they're liable. But Alabama follows generally the completed and accepted work doctrine, but we're apparently the only state that has a third exception that allows liability even where the contractor is not negligent, follows the contract designs, but as a result of the designs themselves, a dangerous condition is created. Any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Senator Schofield, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And so that essentially is what SB 248 was trying to fix.
Yes, sir. It was trying to put Alabama in line with the other 10 states that have adopted the viewpoint.
In other words, what, a contractor who completed the work as per the specifications that were designed, engineered, inspected throughout the process, then signed off on, they can still be sued even if they did nothing wrong.
Yes, sir.
Because of that provision from the 2012 bill.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. This was a great work. I do think there's a couple more, I like to definitely get our peer states that surround us. And the only ones that I think I would, think the committee would want to see is maybe Tennessee and Mississippi, and what they do, and maybe even South Carolina, because they're pretty close to us. And then maybe, Madam Chairman, with your permission, maybe have that to us by the next meeting. And then I think the Weaver decision from 2013 by the Alabama Supreme Court is very important in this this line. So maybe again, with your permission, maybe we could have that at a future meeting to go and to explain to us what the Weaver decision from the Alabama Supreme Court meant, Madam Chair.
All right, unless there's no further objections, we'll go ahead and make sure that's put on the October agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chairman, we've had in the past a legislative committee that met to recommend legislation to the Joint Transportation Committee that could then make a recommendation to the body to pass. And I think this is absolutely the type of legislation that we ought to consider having this body vote on a recommendation for proposed legislation after it has been studied and vetted, and to make that recommendation to the full body. So I'd encourage a timeline which facilitates that prior to us going into session next year.
All right, duly noted. Thank you. Any other further questions of Mr. Heineman? Thank you so much. I appreciate you giving this report and standing in Othni's stead. And we appreciate the fact that you authored it so you can, I'm sure he would delegate some of the work to you, so it's always good to hear it straight from you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
Very much for your time.
All right, and thanks to Senator Elliott, we segued into the subcommittees. I've not really had a lot of feedback from the committee members. Did y'all want to make sure that the subcommittees get back to work and get busy on some stuff to show off? All right, we'll do that. And then our next road show will actually be Bridging, Alabama, and we'll be sending out some further data, but in the interest of time, I want to go ahead and leave it open to the members in case they have anything else. We will be planning the Bridging, Alabama. If you were mentioned in one of the prior schedules, especially the Gee's Bend Ferry, we want to get that scheduled, and the covered bridges. So I'll report on that a little later in some memos, but in deference to the other members, do y'all have anything else that you'd like to bring before the full body?
Madam Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Madam Chairman, I'm bringing this before the body for the body's consideration. We are a standing committee that has a very important job that we perform. Just as the Contract Review Committee, it's a committee that goes on from quadrennium to quadrennium. And I think we, as a committee, we need to be able to have some continuity in terms of how we are operating from Senate to House. And I think I would ask the chairperson and the vice chair if they would, by the next meeting, come up with some ideas and some ways by which we could have a lot of continuity in terms of the transition and the turnover. I think I like what we are doing now. We are getting information. It's a lot of this stuff that I hadn't recognized, but I appreciate what we're doing. And if you all would, I'd appreciate it if you all would take a look at how we could transition from year to year without any downfall one year and upswing the next.
All right, thank you for that input. If you have interest in serving on a subcommittee of that kind and have input of that subject matter, I'll be glad to take it, or I'll assign it to one of our existing subcommittees.
I'd be glad to deal with it and help if someone else would be willing to work on it.
Okay, thank you. We'll put you down. Any other members have items that they'd bring to the attention to the committee?
Madam Chairman,
Yes, sir, you're recognized.
I just wanted to be recognized, that's all. Just being here. How y'all doing?
I want you to speak up, please, sir. We can barely hear you.
Oh, okay. I said that I would just want to be recognized the fact of actually being here. We had a Crime Stoppers meeting earlier, and so I'm late, but I'm here.
Okay, thank you so much. Anybody else on the committee? Like I said, this meeting, we brought you real-time, what I call red meat information to take back to your communities, grant opportunities for your railroad crossing that we had a lot of information from our citizens expressed to us this past year. So I hope you'd take this stuff back to your communities and be a part of the solution. And with hearing no further business, do I hear a motion that we're adjourned?
Madam Chairman, before we leave, Madam Chairman, can you get that information out to us on that grant information so that we can pass it along to our people?
Yes, sir. Our clerk sent that out to you, but we will have it resent.
I haven't seen it. Okay, I'll just go back through my emails and check it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. The meeting is adjourned. Y'all have a good day and safe travels back home.
All right, same to you all.